Well, today's the day the Texas Legislature convenes later today up the road in Austin for the start of the 2025 legislative session.
So the only thing lawmakers are constitutionally required to do during the 140-day session is to pass that balanced budget. Of course, there are a lot of other things on the agenda, but we got our very own Devin Karp right now this morning with a first look at what's expected to happen this session in Austin. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. All right, I know this stuff can be a little bit complicated, but let's try to break it down and make it easy for you. There's going to be 181 lawmakers, and get this, more than 2,400 bills that have already been filed. And since right now there's no Speaker of the House elected just yet, Texas Secretary of State Jane Nelson is going to oversee the organization over the House of Representatives and appoint some temporary officers. So here's what that's going to look like. After the Speaker is elected, the members of the House are going to offer up amendments and vote on the House rules that are going to govern the body's work in the 89th Texas Legislature. Now, currently, there are 3 candidates running to serve as the next Speaker of the Texas House, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, Representative Ana Maria Ramos and Representatives Dustin Burrows and Representative David Cook. Those are the 2 Republicans right there. We spoke with a local political science professor from Trinity University about how this is most likely going to be a Republican speaker in that position because the Democrats don't have the votes they need. But the question is going to remain, what kind of Republican is going to take that seat and what are they going to want to push forward?
This is really a battle within the Republican Party. This is not a question of ideology. This is not about being conservative or moderate or liberal. They are both very conservative leaders. But this is really it's about power.
So the Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar says state lawmakers have about $195 billion for the 2026-2027 budget. That's a slight decrease from the last budget cycle. Now, Governor Greg Abbott will also announce his list of his priority items, determining which legislation can be moved in the first 60 days of the session. We're going to bring you all those updates throughout the session. You can find some breakdowns of some of those key bills being filed right now at KSAT.com. We're also going to have another breakdown of what some of those items could look like and what you could expect coming up in our later shows on GMSA this morning.
All right, time to now talk about the Texas Legislature right now. Obviously, this is starting things up here, starting back in session, Jaff. And of course, there are a lot of things on the board right now for our lawmakers up there in Austin.
Yeah, so the Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar actually says the state lawmakers have about $195 billion for the 2026-2027 budget, which is down slightly from last budget. Devin Karp right here with us, giving us a breakdown of what's expected today in Austin.
Hey, good morning, guys. All right, I know a lot of this stuff can get pretty, out there. So let's focus in a little bit about what we could potentially see. So those lawmakers are going to be back in Austin later today for the 89th Texas Legislature. Now, state leaders are required by Texas law to have a budget in place by June 2nd, which is actually the final day of that session. So that budget that we mentioned earlier, that's just a little bit down from the last 2 years, where Hagar says we had about a once-in-a-lifetime cash balance pop up. Between now and then, thousands of other bills are going to be filed and debated. And while Governor Greg Abbott hasn't laid out his exact priorities yet, top of the list, we can expect bills around school vouchers and school choice coming up, immigration to be sure, as well as marijuana and some THC products in Texas that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has talked about. Now, additionally, political science professor at UTSA John Taylor thinks some of those San Antonio's strong needs could pop up there as well.
There is a real need to push and to think long-term planning for things such as water. Additionally, I think an area for at least an issue for San Antonio is to look for state support for, in particular for transportation, public transportation, not just building freeways, but to build public transit systems.
Now, of course, a lot of what actually gets through the House is going to revolve around who's going to become the Speaker. They're going to give a bigger say on what goes on the agenda, who's going to get in charge of some committee chairs, and other items like that. Now, people could start voting for that person as early as today. Some of those big items you might have heard about, like a dangerous dog legislation item, that's a big one in San Antonio, also coming up on KSAT.com. We're going to break down at 6:30 what some of those could be and what you could see coming up as the legislature goes on.
All right, big talker of the day. It's a big day for lawmakers right now. The Texas Legislature convenes later today for the start of the 2025 legislative session.
That's right. Up the road there in Austin, there's a long list of big ticket items that we're expecting to see come up during this session, from school choice vouchers to, of course, something that has impacted San Antonio, dangerous dog laws.
Our very own Devin Carr right now in the studio this morning, giving us a look at what we could see coming up today.
Hey, good morning, guys. You know, there's a lot we can talk about when things come to the legislative session, but what I want to start off first is that we currently don't have an elected Speaker of the House right now. That's because the last Speaker, Representative Dade Fellon, is not running again. Now, currently, there's 3 candidates running to serve as the next Speaker of the House: 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, Representative Ana Maria Ramos and Representative Dustin Burrows, along with Representative David Cook. Now, we spoke with 2 political science professors in San Antonio who tell us Democrats most likely not going to get that position because of the lack of votes that they have compared with Republicans. But between those 2 Republican candidates, both are strong conservatives. The question now remains how each representative would choose to work with Democrats for committee chair assignments and how they would move some legislative items forward.
This isn't normal. It's not normal for us to be the day ahead of the session starting for us not to know who the speaker is. So it's a little bit different than what's happened in the past.
It's almost as though Austin has turned into a mini version of Washington, D.C., particularly in terms of the U.S. House versus the Texas House, in the sense of they seem to be dysfunctional and trying to find a speaker, massive fights over that, factionalism within the Republican Party.
Now, when it comes to how things are actually going to get done, the Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar announced on Monday that lawmakers are going to have just under $195 billion in revenue to fund state operations for the 2026 and 2027 fiscal year. That's down a little bit from the last 2 years where Hagar says we did have a once-in-a-lifetime cash balance. Now, as far as some of the items we could see for those big-ticket legislative things, school vouchers, THC products in Texas, like RJ mentioned earlier, dangerous dogs, and environmental items, we're going to give you a look at some of that coming up in the next half hour.
6:36 right now. Big day for lawmakers in Texas coming together for the start of the 89th Texas Legislature.
That's right. The decisions they make are going to impact every single person living here in the Lone Star State, and there's some pretty big items on the docket during this session.
Let's get out to Devin, who's in the studio with us right now, breaking down this entire deal. You've been working all morning long on this.
Well, there's a lot to cover here, and one of the big ones you guys at home have probably heard about after a lot of effort from Republicans over the last year is going to be around school vouchers. Now, we're going to get to that in a second, but I want to take a look at what else you could see coming up in the session shortly. So first off, Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar announced that the 2026-2027 budget is sitting at around $195 billion. Now, that's going to make sure that the light stays on. But some of the things that we could see revolve around might be some conservative social policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. But 2 political science professors that we spoke to say a lot of that could depend on who actually becomes the elected House Speaker. In the meantime, a local nonprofit, Environment Texas, thinks lawmakers might move towards addressing forever chemicals and energy concerns. Some other things to look out for revolve around some housing concerns, infrastructure, potential high school athlete transport portal, as well as highways and school vouchers. With political science professor at UTSA, John Taylor, tells us Governor Greg Abbott believes he now has the votes for
The issues that will come up that are pressing and important: K through 12 education, Governor Abbott and his vouchers, specifically the fact that he was able to spend a lot of money to defeat about 10 to 12 Republican incumbents. He thinks he has the votes to get it through. The question is, what kind of voucher plan, if it happens?
Now, something else that could gain some momentum is bringing back a bill from a San Antonio area state senator to increase consequences for dangerous dog owners of dogs involved in attacks. Political science professor Juan Sepulveda believes that it's something that Senator Jose Menendez could gain ground on this time around.
This is not a Democratic Party political issue. This is something we've been kind of seeing as a community. So, and he's been there long. He's got good relationships. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to kind of get something done.
And of course, once a new Speaker of the House is elected, that's going to determine a lot of what's going through the legislature and how fast. So I know there's a lot to take in there, guys, but something else to think about, what usually affects things going on in the legislature, is what's happening right here. Justin was mentioning some of that cold weather coming in next week. That could also lead to some bigger discussions around the energy grids in Texas. To get a better look at some of these bills, you can visit our website, ksat.com.